Our top story tonight, could Rishi's rollback on net zero see him surge in popularity, despite reports tonight that half of all new cars will have to be electric within 5 years? A poll from Which today finds their public appeal is plummeting. According to their figures, just 46% would consider buying an electric car compared to 64% in just 2021. And all of that as Labour's poll lead drops by 8% in just 10 days. So could it be that despite howls of protest, the government's change of heart on climate change policies is actually, well, popular? Tonight we'll examine that and ask how much of a difference they'll make at the next election. Joining me now are the Conservative MP and supporter of Parliament's Net Zero Scrutiny Group, John Redwood, and Which consumer expert, Harry Kind. Welcome to you both. John, firstly, how much of a difference do you think these revelations, announcements last week from the Prime Minister on net zero are making in this latest opinion poll?
Well, I think they were a very good start. I think the people want realism, and I don't think they want to be bossed around and be made to buy things that are too dear or aren't going to work very well. I think now the government's got to go away and work out the detail, because quite a lot of regulations, planned and actual, have been put in place, and taxes have been put in place, assuming that everybody is going to go electric for their heating and their cars very quickly, whereas I don't think yet we got the full product range or all the right technological answers. And so I welcome a pause for reconsideration.
Would you consider that it's a coincidence that the poll, or that particular poll, has narrowed somewhat in favour of Rishi Sunak just shortly after he made that announcement?
No, I don't think it's an accident at all. I think what has happened is an awful lot of people who were happy to vote Conservative in 2019 have been telling pollsters they're not pleased enough with the government and they're not necessarily going to vote Conservative at the moment. And I think it's appealing to that group to say to them, we're the one party that won't be bossing you around and charging you high taxes and telling you what kind of transport you've got to use and banning things you like, or making you rip out your boiler and put in a very expensive heat pump before you're ready. I think that is common sense and popular, whereas, of course, all the main left-wing parties know best and intend to impose taxes and regulations to make people change their heating and transport before the products are good enough.
The phrase "the firing gun has been started," of course, is often used. Labour do have a colossal mountain to climb. They've got to get... It's a 12% swing they need to gain 123 seats to get a majority of just one. However, the polls are still very much against the Conservatives at the moment. It's still a big lead for Keir Starmer. Do you still think the Tories can win?
Yes, it is a big lead, but these polls are very volatile. As you just pointed out, they've shifted 8 points in a week. I think there's every chance of it being a properly contested election in a year's time, when I guess is when we're going to have it. But I do think the government's got to do more of these very common sense approaches, saying that by all means, let's get carbon dioxide out of the system, but let's do it at a pace and a price that people will accept and can afford. Because you can do so much as a government with big business. You can obviously get a lot of carbon out of the way you generate your electricity, or the way big business conducts itself. But to go the whole way, you're going to need the full engagement of an awful lot of people, many of whom simply don't have the money to install £10,000 or £15,000 heat pumps, even if they thought they would be a good idea.
Let's get a view on this from Which. Harry Kind, consumer expert from Which, is with us. Good to see you, Harry. Tell us about your research. What is that showing in terms of the appetite for green initiatives?
Well, consumers basically don't like the words being put into their mouth that they don't care about the environment. They really do. 80% of the people we spoke to say, I have an impact on the environment in my choices, and therefore I am going to make greener choices. Now, when it comes to electric vehicles, they are reticent about that, and I think we've seen with the cost of living crisis, the pressure of our budgets being squeezed means that people are worried about being able to afford an electric vehicle. That's the topic concern. But then there are other things like range anxiety, the availability of the charging network, and the cost of installing a charger at home. And we've seen a lot of those kind of subsidies for that being withdrawn to make it harder to buy an electric car. And actually, there's a big difference here between new car buyers and used car buyers. New car buyers are a tiny minority. They're 20% of the car buying market. And so actually, if you are someone who's buying a new car, well, chances are you're probably getting a hybrid or an electric vehicle that's fully battery powered. They make up the same proportion of new cars as petrol cars. So we're already seeing this transition.
So if you factor in the hybrid element to it,
absolutely,
that's where the difference. But you can see why a politician would think, hang on a sec, you know, this is a ripe old bit of terrain for me to look into, because there are big question marks over this. And, you know, you mentioned price. I mean, that's a huge factor, right? I mean, particularly with the word electric or even hybrid for that matter. These are expensive vehicles.
They're expensive.
And there's no big second-hand market.
Well, do you know, the market for second-hand electric cars is huge. People are desperate for these things. There's not enough of them out there right now for people. So that is actually driving a lot of the growth in the used car market. But when it comes to that kind of upfront cost, we do hear that concern. But we also hear from consumers who say this is a long-term investment, which over the years will be substantially cheaper to run. But that isn't enough when you're worried that there's not going to be a charging point when you're halfway along your journey, when there's not that kind of infrastructure investment, which we'd like to see.
Let's just get a final word in from John, if we can, on that issue of HS2, John, which does in many respects factor into a lot of what we're talking about here, that the HS2 rail link that will go to Manchester is under threat. I know you oppose this, but you have said it should have started in the north where the infrastructure is most needed. Do you think dropping that northern section is a betrayal?
We don't know what the government's going to do, but on these green issues, we've rightly heard that people agreed and want to do their bit for the planet. But of course, a lot of these proposals are doing the opposite. One of the problems with buying an electric car is if you go home and plug it in on a typical evening when there's not a lot of wind, you're plugging into a gas power station. So how does that help the CO2 problem? And with HS2, there's going to be the most enormous amount of CO2 generated, making all the concrete and steel and running all the construction plant on diesel to put the line in. I think the world has changed since the original business case for HS2. Not only is it more than 3 times the cost of the original business case, which makes huge difference to possible payoff, but the whole pattern of rail travel has changed with the end of 5-day-a-week commuting, with people who had to pay very large sums for a weekly season ticket, which was really the core of the passenger railway. I want more investment for the north, in the north, to get better services soon, rather than a much delayed and over budget train set that they're currently trying to build. And we've got the technology. Digital signalling is the way to get more services on the same track quite safely, and to have more reliable services with much better real-time information for both the driver in the cab and the controllers of the network. And so can we please get on with that? Because I think the people of the north want the money spent there in better trains for them now, rather than 10, 15 years' time, maybe some super train to get them to London a bit quicker.
John Redwood, thank you.